Today's episode will take an unexpected turn as we shift focus from the geopolitical discussions of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East to Bitcoin. You might wonder, what does Bitcoin have to do with the region? Well, considering Cyprus's 2013 banking crisis, the first globally to impose a bail-in on a major currency, the euro, and Lebanon's ongoing economic turmoil since 2019, where strict banking controls and a 95% currency devaluation have left citizens and government there in crisis. Is it time for countries in the region, as well as their citizens, to consider Bitcoin as a store of value and a wealth creator, especially for Lebanon's struggling economy and Cyprus's efforts to safeguard its financial future? Our guest today is Natalie Brunell. Natalie is a household name for those following Bitcoin podcasters, as she is a podcast host, an educator, and a media commentator in the Bitcoin space. The biggest names in Bitcoin always talk to Natalie. Her popular independent show, the Coin Stories podcast, features interviews with Bitcoin thought leaders and some of the biggest investors, uncovers headlines related to finance and economic issues facing society. Coin Stories is the top woman-hosted Bitcoin education show in the world and ranks top 10 in business news podcasts globally. Previously, Natalie was an award-winning TV journalist and investigative reporter. For more than 10 years, she covered in-depth local and national news topics and holds a regional news Emmy for breaking news coverage, as well as multiple Emmy nominations for investigative news stories. Natalie has been featured on networks like Fox Business, Fox News, ABC News, Forbes, you name it. Natalie, can I say what an honor it is to host you today? Welcome.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind of you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. So, Natalie, let's get right into it, right? Given the economic crisis in Lebanon and Cyprus, where unfortunately in Lebanon it's still ongoing, where banks still impose strict capital controls and currency devaluation there is at 95%, how can Bitcoin act as a hedge for individuals in these regions looking to preserve their wealth, Natalie, and avoid the risks tied to traditional banking systems?
Well, the key word you said there is risk. When banks and governments control your money, then you are subject to whatever rules they impose. And Bitcoin, for the first time, offers a global open protocol that gives us back our financial freedom and sovereignty. No one can control Bitcoin. It's completely decentralized. No one can confiscate it from you. So it really empowers people, especially people that are facing, like you said, banking crises, inflation rates that are out of control, destroying their purchasing power, and capital controls and government oppression and censorship. It's the one tool that I think globally can empower the most people. And that's why I think it's really imperative to teach people about it and for people to take the time to educate themselves.
Thank you for that. So as Bitcoin continues to gain traction globally, do you believe that it could eventually be seen as a legitimate store of value, particularly in a region where traditional currencies like the Lebanese pound have been volatile, and also considering the geopolitical volatility of the region itself here in the Middle East?
I think that Bitcoin globally is the best store of value. It is volatile, but if you zoom out, it has been the best performing asset in pretty much every fiat currency that I've seen. It allows you to store your value for the future, and again, in a way that can't be devalued or manipulated by governments, central bankers, third parties, and counterparties. So I think that for the future, when it comes to saving, it's really important to take debasing currencies and actually convert them to something hard and scarce that no one can actually debase. Inflation is one of the biggest problems that I think people are facing no matter where they live. Inflation rates can vary, but they're all the result of central planning and governments devaluing the currencies. I think that's a major problem because we have no say in it. So we're ultimately working for a form of money that someone else can just print. And the workers don't benefit from money printing. We need to store our money in assets that go up in value. A lot of people over the years have turned to things like stocks and real estate, especially here in the United States. But those types of assets also carry risks, and they're not available to the entire world in the way that Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is an open protocol that you can access at just fractions of a Bitcoin in any fiat currency. And that's why I think it really does empower people globally to finally save in something that, again, can never be inflated, can't be changed, can't be influenced by a foreign government. And I think it's so important to adopt Bitcoin no matter where you are.
Thank you for that. So you see, Greek Cypriots residing in Cyprus number around 800,000 to a million, with an extra 500,000 diaspora living abroad. That's a 33% of the population of Cypriots who are immigrants. Now, for Lebanon, the numbers are even more striking, with 4.5 to 5 million Lebanese residing in Lebanon, but over 14 million Lebanese living abroad. That's a 75% diaspora of the population. In the case of the Lebanese diaspora, they play a significant role also in Lebanon's economy, sending remittances back to Lebanon and being a key source of income for most of their families. When it comes to the diaspora, what role could Bitcoin play in facilitating remittances for people, especially when traditional methods are often slow and costly?
Well, that's exactly the problem. When you're relying on counterparties and gatekeepers, essentially, that all take a toll and all take their own cut, then you're not able to send money to where you want without friction and without people essentially taking up to a third of what you're trying to send. There are so many people who do send remittances here in the United States globally, and only a small portion of that actually ends up where they're intending it to go, and it takes a very long time to settle on the back end. We can actually fix that. I mean, technology is now empowering that, and Bitcoin is the tool that you can use to send money globally for a very low cost, and it settles almost instantly, especially on the Lightning Network. So this is, I think, extremely important because people work hard for the money that they're trying to send. And why should there be so many counterparties and intermediaries along the way taking a small cut of what you worked hard for? I think Bitcoin will empower not just individuals, but also businesses and even eventually governments to transact and engage in digital global commerce in a way that's much more frictionless and easy than it is today.
Excellent. Let's go to the case of, because I wanna focus on the countries and people of countries paying more attention to Bitcoin. Before adopting Bitcoin as legal tender in 2021, El Salvador faced high debt, sluggish growth, and heavy reliance on remittances also, and used the US dollar as its currency, limiting that way monetary control. So seeking a way out, its visionary leader, President Bukele, made Bitcoin legal tender. So do you think the governments of Lebanon and Cyprus should have already been looking at Bitcoin as a viable option to stabilize or diversify their economies, particularly given Lebanon's ongoing fiscal challenges and the potential of digital assets to attract foreign investment?
Well, I'm a big believer in allowing the market to decide what should be money. And that's what Bitcoin is. It's an emergent phenomenon. It came bottom up from the working class. It wasn't imposed on us by any rulers. And I think that that's really important because when a government decides what money is and they can ultimately control it, that's when you have the problems of inflation, the destruction of your purchasing power. And Bitcoin really is this tool of empowerment at every level. It allows us to transact, it allows us to store value for the future. So I think that governments should never step in and intervene and decide what someone can and can't do freely with the money that they're essentially earning, working hard for, and trying to save for the future. I think that governments should actually step out of the way. There's always an argument to be made for clear rules of the road so that investors are protected. But Bitcoin is globally recognized as a digital commodity, an asset with no issuer. It is an open source protocol that anyone can audit. and it's completely transparent for any of us to look at, no matter where we are, and actually verify. So I think that when governments actually step out of the way and allow the free market to thrive and adopt a hard money like Bitcoin, that's when we can actually encourage more human flourishing and productivity in a way that I don't think we've seen because of the amount of central planning that so many of the governments have imposed, with fiat currencies holding the ultimate power. I think that we need something like Bitcoin to sort of level the playing field and allow people to save in something that can't be controlled by their rulers.
Yes, but I was also I wanted more to touch upon with that question, the case of governments, like in the case of the U.S., how there's all this chatter about possibly President Trump setting up a Bitcoin strategic reserve. So it was under that context that I set the question that if governments would view it, the governments here like Lebanon and Cyprus, under that prism.
And I think that they will. I think that more and more countries will see Bitcoin as a powerful asset to have on their balance sheets. But I still am more in favor of the
Okay.
individual being able to access Bitcoin to save for the future. Governments right now are so in debt. They will always want to issue fiat currencies. They will always want to tax and extract value. And Bitcoin really empowers people, again, in a way that they can actually plan for their futures. So I think that we can expect more sovereign wealth funds and central banks eventually adopting Bitcoin, although it's slow to come. And the narratives will disappear that Bitcoin is sort of a competition to the fiat currencies in a way that makes governments not want to adopt it. I think governments instead will go in the direction of, hey, we have our fiat currencies. That's what we're going to levy taxes on. But everyone can save in Bitcoin, and the government itself will save in Bitcoin because it's the strongest asset to actually have on the balance sheet. Right now, we've seen a pattern of central banks moving more toward gold again, this neutral reserve asset that has 1,000 years of history. But I think Bitcoin will actually rise superior to gold. It will be the apex property and apex asset that everyone adopts, from the individual level to the government level. So it's exciting to see it being discussed in those circles, but I'm not sure when we'll actually adopt a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I still do think it will take some time for the government to prepare for something as big as that, because it would send a signal globally that Bitcoin is a very, very serious nation state asset, and every central bank is going to need to adopt it at some point.
Yeah, it would be, if such a thing happens, it would also help countries out of their severe debt that they're in. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's another way that they could look at it.
Absolutely. I mean, all the governments have so many liabilities now. They keep printing money and going further and further into debt, and that's what our system is really based on. Most of our debt, or most of our money rather, is actually debt. And so why not adopt something like Bitcoin, which again is the best store of value that exists right now, so that we can actually get out of some of that debt and refocus some of that monetary capital, not to paying off interest or more and more debt obligations, but actually investing in infrastructure and in making a country strong. And that applies both to the United States as well as other nations around the world.
Thank you for that. So you see, then we come to the issue of Bitcoin and its trustworthiness. I mean, I know in the U.S., um, it has a more positive spin to it, but in Cyprus, it's a common occurrence, practically weekly, to read in the news of people here losing their savings or retirement funds to scams where malicious actors trick them into investing in crypto, only for their money to vanish with no trace of who deceived them. So, Natalie, could you please emphasize to our channel viewers two key points? First, that Bitcoin is entirely different from everything else labeled as crypto. And second, what's the safest way for anyone to buy and hold Bitcoin so that they don't get fooled into these scams?
Yeah, sure. So again, Bitcoin is a commodity. It is an asset with no issuer, which does make it truly unique. It is the only cryptocurrency that is truly decentralized, and it is backed by energy. It's a global network that all of us can access, backed by energy. However, built on top of Bitcoin and using Bitcoin are companies that introduce counterparty risk, which isn't that dissimilar from our current banking system, only that at least here in the United States, in our current banking system, we have backstops. We have the Federal Reserve that will bail people out. We have federal deposit insurance. And so people feel sort of lulled into a false sense of safety, even though their dollars are getting inflated away. With Bitcoin, it is a protocol with a finite supply asset at the core, a digital native currency. That is Bitcoin. So the best way I think to keep it protected is to actually take self-custody. It sounds intimidating at first. I thought it was too technical, but it's very easy for anyone to do that. And you could take self-custody in a single key, or you can distribute the risk and do a collaborative multi-sig custody. And there are how-to solutions online that people can very easily follow. Then you have no counterparty risk. There is no bank that can shut down or have a bank run, or there's a hacker that comes in to steal a bunch of the tokens. You are actually carrying your Bitcoin entirely as a bearer instrument. And I urge people to take that step, because it does feel like you have ultimate financial sovereignty when you take self-custody. Now, when you do engage with counterparties like exchanges, banks, custody solutions that are online, where you're trusting your Bitcoin essentially to them, then you have to know that there is a risk involved. There is no backstop when it comes to Bitcoin. There is no bailout. So you have to be very, very careful and do your research on where you're actually sending your money, who these custodians are, who the bankers or the exchanges are, because you're trusting them with your money. So it takes an extra step of research, a little bit more due diligence than it does in the traditional banking system, which is, again, why I really recommend self-custody.
And for self-custody, I mean, there are a number of reliable firms out there that offer these services that one could easily find when they do a correct vetting process, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, there is a very vibrant market with new products every single day. I share my favorite products on my shows. I love the Cold Card Cold Storage wallet. That's my favorite because it's open source and very simple to use. I love using Casa for multi-sig collaborative custody. I'm not sure if they're all available to international customers, but I've really experimented in this space because it's important to try things, to really research the companies, to understand the platforms and what they're offering. But yes, there are so many solutions out there. It just depends what people want to do in terms of taking self-custody, what type of level of risk they're willing to take on or not, whether they trust a custodian or want to do it all themselves. So every option is really available to people who are taking self-custody.
Thank you, Natalie. Now, I wanted to ask you about, recent developments. What's your take on Bitcoin's drop from 100 plus K to 83,000 now as we speak? Do you see this as a temporary correction or a sign of a deeper trend?
No, I see it as par for the course. Bitcoin has many pullbacks in each bull market. In 2017 and in 2021, we saw it pull back about a dozen times of 20% or so, and then obviously retraced its path upwards. So this is a correction. Times like this are actually good buying opportunities. I'm a big believer that when it tends to crash in price, that's a great time to step in, or maybe you have a target buy order that gets executed like I did, and it's just a good time to stack more Bitcoin. You have to have long-term conviction, because this is a long-term hold asset, and there is no one who has bought Bitcoin and held it for 4 years who has lost money. It is the best performing asset of the last decade. So don't be scared away by the volatility. As Michael Saylor says, volatility is vitality in the long run.
That's great. That's a great quote that you just said of Michael. Lastly, I cannot host you and not ask about America, and especially two issues. The US dollar remains the global reserve currency. US debt rises by $1 trillion every quarter and continues dollar printing, as you mentioned earlier, debases and weakens the dollar, as one out of every $4, if I'm not mistaken, has been printed in just the last 5 years, right? So there's also growing chatter on X, urging Elon Musk and Doge to also verify the nation's gold reserves at Fort Knox, which were last audited in 1953, if I'm not mistaken. So what's your take on these two issues? I mean, they're not just debated in the US, they're believe me, they're a hot topic in Europe, in the Middle East, in little like when people gather, they talk about these things. So what's your take? And do you think that Elon will investigate? And if he does, will he choose this time not to disclose his findings despite his actual stance on transparency when it came with USAID? Because if suspicions about America's gold reserves prove to be true, the global ramifications would be destructive, Natalie.
Yes, I would imagine so. It's crazy that we've gone this long and we actually have no clue. I mean, government should be much more transparent. They're supposed to govern at the consent of us, those that they govern. We need to be able to say and see what is happening and where the money is going. So what he's done to expose the fraud and the waste with USAID and other aspects of spending has just been phenomenal and been eye-opening, and I hope it changes something. But when it comes to Fort Knox gold, there is a big question. Again, why haven't we been able to audit it after all of these years? That's something that Ron Paul, the former congressman and presidential candidate, talked about on my show. He would love to go in there and see what's there. I think there's a chance that we actually have more gold than we actually have stated through, I mean, we've confiscated gold. There's been opportunities for us to acquire potentially even more gold, but who actually has claims on those gold? So maybe we actually have it in our possession but don't own it. We owe it to people. I mean, I don't know what they would find, but I think transparency is always the key. And what's unique about Bitcoin is, again, it's an open public ledger that can be verified, audited by anyone around the world at any time. So every 10 minutes, the entire network comes to an agreement and anyone can see the state of the ledger. We don't have that with something like gold. It's very difficult to send gold globally and have it settle in 10 minutes. It's absolutely impossible to do that. So I think we need to adopt something that's a little bit more open and transparent as an asset, as opposed to something that once it goes into vaults, especially central bank vaults, we lose track of it for decades and we don't know who actually owns it. And we defaulted on gold back in 1971. And I think that a lot of secrecy has covered up what's actually happened with our gold as countries called it back and wanted to reclaim it because we were inflating so much. So who knows? Maybe we have more than we think, and maybe we have less.
Well, only time will tell, right? We'll see how Elon will act upon it, or if President Trump will allow him to act upon it. Because I think as an individual, he's very impulsive, and he would want to act upon it. So there's a lot of things at play there.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Natalie. So I wanted to say that anyone wanting to follow Natalie and her educational, informative work, I'll provide info on Natalie and links to her social media handles in the description box below. And Natalie, I wanted to say that your presence today marks 2 firsts for the channel. You're our first guest at this lovely studio, and you're Unfiltered's first female guest ever.
Oh, wow. Well, that's an honor. I'm very grateful. One of my goals is to extend financial literacy and education about Bitcoin to women. I think that we're disproportionately just not represented in the space as much as I think we should be. So very, very grateful to be on your show.
Thank you for all that you do. I follow you diligently. And once again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.